In an upscale neighborhood in the Boston suburbs, Avery Monroe began her morning routine. Perched on the marble kitchen counter, she sipped her coffee while preparing for today's client meeting. Avery had struggled to get her interior design firm off the ground, but things had finally stabilized over the past few months. "Mom, have you seen my lunchbox?" 8-year-old Ethan came bounding down the stairs. His bright blue eyes always warmed his mother's heart. "It's in the refrigerator, I prepared it yesterday," Avery smiled, gently fixing her son's tousled hair. The kitchen door opened, and Richard appeared in his business suit. He was known as one of Boston's top insurance brokers. At first glance, they were the perfect family, a large suburban home, successful careers, and an adorable son. "Good morning," Richard greeted coldly, still holding his briefcase. He had barely joined the family for breakfast lately. "Leaving early again?" Avery tried to meet her husband's eyes, but Richard was busy checking his phone. "Final stage of a big contract." "Don't expect me for dinner either." He lightly patted his son's head, took just one sip of coffee, and started preparing to leave. Avery sighed. Her relationship with Richard had noticeably cooled over the past few months. He no longer talked like he used to, came home late, and gave only vague answers to her questions. Whenever she pressed him, she always got the same answer: "I'm trying to close a big deal. It's for the family." After Richard left, Avery dropped her son off at school and headed to her office. Her design firm was small, but well regarded by clients and slowly expanding. That afternoon, while she was reviewing plans for a new project, the phone rang. It was Richard's mother, Carol. "Avery, as a member of this family, you should be more responsible." Carol's voice always carried a critical tone. "Richard is busy with work, yet you always prioritize your own career." Avery took a deep breath. Criticism from her mother-in-law was routine. "Carol, I'm contributing to the family income too. Besides, Richard and I agreed to support each other's careers." "Oh, really?" Carol said coolly. "Well, about the cruise next month. It's to celebrate Walter and my 40th wedding anniversary. The whole family will attend." Avery was puzzled. "Cruise? Richard hasn't mentioned anything. He probably forgot to tell you because he's been so busy. We'll be touring the Caribbean for 10 days. Since Walter recovered from his heart attack last year, we want to make it a special celebration. You and Ethan are coming, right?" Avery thought about the project deadlines approaching. "Actually, I have a major project during that time." "My goodness. You're putting work before family. Think how disappointed Walter will be." Carol's voice was full of reproach. That evening, when Richard came home, Avery brought up the cruise. "Why didn't you tell me? I need to adjust my project schedule." Richard replied with unusual firmness, "This is for my father. He's just recovered from a heart attack last year. We should attend as a family." Avery was surprised by her husband's attitude. Richard had been indifferent about her work lately. She wondered why he was suddenly insistent about this cruise. In the weeks before the cruise departure, Richard's behavior grew increasingly strange. He made more hushed phone calls, abruptly ending conversations when Avery entered the room. Once, when she tried to enter his study, Richard hastily hid some documents in a drawer. "Is something wrong?" Avery would ask, but Richard's answer remained the same. "Just business. Nothing to worry about." But instinctively, she felt something was off. Richard's overtime increased, sometimes coming home in the middle of the night. Once, waking up late, she found Richard still awake, staring at his computer screen. When she called out to him, he quickly closed the laptop. The day before departure, after tucking her son into bed, Avery prepared for the trip with lingering anxiety. She hoped this cruise might offer a chance to repair her relationship with her husband. Boarding the cruise ship, Avery immediately sensed tension. Carol was paying unusual attention to her and her son. "Avery, your room with Ethan is near ours. Let me know your schedule. I want to do some special activities with Ethan." In Carol's eyes, Avery saw not affection but something calculated. Feeling uneasy, she smiled at her mother-in-law. "Thank you, Carol. But Ethan and I plan to spend time together." Carol told Avery with an eerie smile, "This cruise is going to be special." Avery sensed something was being planned among the family but couldn't yet grasp the full picture. On the evening of the third day of the cruise, Avery was with her son on deck, watching the sea. The beautiful Caribbean sunset colored the horizon, while Ethan excitedly talked about dolphins. This peaceful moment changed with Richard's arrival. "Here you are," Richard's voice was unusually cheerful, almost affectionate. "I've been looking for you." Avery was confused by her husband's sudden change in attitude. "Is something wrong?" Richard smiled and said, "Tonight is special. I've booked a private dining experience in our cabin suite, with the chef's special dinner." Ethan let out a cheer. "Yay! Special dinner with Dad. My parents are attending another event, so it'll be just the three of us," Richard continued. His expression showed a gentleness Avery hadn't seen in a long time. Though skeptical of this sudden change, Avery was moved by the opportunity for family time. "That's lovely. Any special reason?" "Just want to spend time with family," Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I realized I've been too busy lately." Back in the luxurious cabin suite, the table was indeed set with an elaborate meal. Seafood appetizers, lobster main course, and even Ethan's favorite chocolate dessert. Through the windows, starlight and the dark sea created a romantic atmosphere. "Wow! All this for us?" Ethan's eyes sparkled. "Yes, especially for you," Richard smiled at his son. "I arranged all your favorite desserts today." Richard opened a wine bottle and clinked glasses with Avery. "A toast to our new life ahead." Avery felt something odd about his words. "New life?" "Yes, to new possibilities, new adventures," Richard answered vaguely. His eyes seemed to be hiding something. During dinner, Richard appeared to enjoy family conversation for the first time in a while. He showed interest in Ethan's school activities and asked about Avery's recent projects. Occasionally, though, he checked his watch and phone. "Dad, will you come to the pool with me tomorrow?" Ethan asked Richard. "Of course," Richard answered, but his voice carried a subtle hesitation. Midway through the meal, Richard's phone rang. He looked at the screen, his expression tensing slightly, and said, "I'll be right back," before stepping out. Avery heard him speaking in hushed tones outside. His voice was low and tense. When Richard returned, his expression was rigid, showing signs of anxiety. "Is something wrong?" Avery asked, but he brushed it off, saying, "Business call. Don't worry about it." When dessert time came, Richard served a special chocolate cake. "This is a special order. I specifically requested it from the chef." Avery and Ethan happily began eating the cake. It was sweet and delicious at first, but after a few bites, Avery began to feel strange. Her body felt hot, and her vision blurred. Ethan's face flushed as he said, "Mom, I feel funny." "Richard, we're not feeling well." Avery tried to stand, but her legs wobbled, and she clutched the table. Her head was spinning, making it difficult to think clearly. Richard calmly said, "You'll feel better after resting," and helped her lie down on the sofa. Ethan was similarly placed on another sofa. Avery felt terrified as she sensed her consciousness fading. She tried to see Richard's expression, but his face appeared blurry. As her consciousness became intermittent, Avery heard Richard on the phone again. His voice was cold and calculated. "It's going as planned. It's working. They can't move. By morning, they'll both be at the bottom of the sea. Now it's your turn." Terror coursed through Avery's body. The moment she realized her husband was trying to kill her and her son had arrived. She desperately tried to stay conscious. She had to protect Ethan. After hanging up, Richard surveyed the room, checking on Avery and Ethan. "Perfect. I'll be back in about 30 minutes, he muttered before leaving the room. Avery summoned all her strength to maintain consciousness. Her son's safety was the priority. After confirming Richard had left, she used her trembling limbs to crawl to her son's sofa. She called her son's name, and fortunately, Ethan hadn't completely lost consciousness either. "Mom, my head's spinning. I feel sick." Ethan's voice was weak. Avery firmly grasped her son's hand and whispered in his ear, "Stay still, don't open your eyes yet, even when Dad comes back, pretend to be asleep." Ethan nodded fearfully, his small hand squeezing Avery's back tightly. Avery quickly took out her phone to call for help, but communication was poor on the ship, and there was no signal. Trembling with fear and the drug's effects, she crawled to the door and locked it. She found a ship map and located the security office. The nearest one was 3 floors down. "Ethan, listen, we're in danger. Dad is." She chose her words carefully. "Dad is trying to hurt us. We need to get help." Fear filled Ethan's eyes. "But why would Dad do that?" "There's no time to explain now. Just trust Mom." Avery hugged her son. Avery gripped the doorknob and slowly opened it with trembling hands. The hallway was quiet. After looking around, she reached out to Ethan. "Ethan, hold my hand tightly. We need to walk quietly." She struggled to stand and helped her son up. Both unsteady on their feet, they leaned against the wall as they entered the hallway. Avery wrapped a piece of the poisoned chocolate cake in a napkin and put it in her pocket. It would serve as evidence. "Mom, I'm scared," Ethan said in a small voice. His face was pale, with sweat on his forehead. "It's all right, I'll protect you," Avery tried desperately to appear calm. "We're going to the security office. It's 3 floors down." As confirmed on the ship map, the nearest elevator was at the end of the corridor. The two stumbled forward, occasionally stopping to catch their breath. The drug's effects seemed to be gradually wearing off, but their bodies were still numb, and they had headaches. "Shoo!" Avery suddenly stopped and pulled her son against the wall. She had heard Carol's voice around the corner. She was just coming out of another guest room. Avery held her breath, looking for an escape. Finding a nearby laundry room door, she quickly pushed Ethan inside. Leaving the door slightly ajar, Avery watched Carol approach. Carol was talking on her phone. "There's no sound from their room anymore. The drug must be working." Avery's heart raced. Carol was also involved in the plan. The mother-in-law stopped in front of their room and knocked. When there was no response, she took out a key card. "Richard, I'm coming in. I'll check on them." Avery froze in fear, imagining Carol's reaction when she discovered they were gone. She gripped her son's hand and whispered in his ear. "We're going to run now. Towards the elevator." The moment Carol entered the room, Avery and Ethan burst out of the laundry room and began running in the opposite direction. Despite stumbling and hitting the walls, they desperately headed for the elevator. "They're gone." Carol's shout came from behind. "Richard, they've escaped." Avery didn't look back. She pressed the elevator button and waited for the doors to open. Ethan had started crying in fear. "Mom, Grandma's coming." From the far end of the hallway, Carol was approaching them with quick steps. "Avery. Ethan. Wait there. Richard is worried about you." The elevator doors opened, and Avery pushed her son inside. "Hurry." She pressed the "close" button repeatedly. As the doors began to close, Carol came running. "Wait. You're not well." The doors closed completely, and the elevator began its descent. Avery leaned against the wall in relief. Ethan was trembling in her arms. "Is Grandma bad too?" Avery embraced her son. "Don't worry. We'll get help soon." The elevator arrived at the ship's main deck. When the doors opened, they emerged into an atrium bustling with passengers. The evening entertainment had just ended, and people were gradually returning to their rooms. Avery looked for signs indicating the security office's location. "It's over there," she said, pulling her son's hand, trying to make their way through the crowd. However, the drug's effects hadn't completely worn off, and both struggled to walk straight. Some passengers looked at them suspiciously. "Mom, that person." Ethan fearfully pointed to a young female staff member across the crowd. It was the woman Richard had lunched with. She was looking around vigilantly while talking on her phone. "Let's avoid that woman." Avery changed direction, entering another corridor. The ship was like a maze, and even with the direction signs, finding the security office was confusing. I think it's this way, Avery proceeded, though uncertain. However, the corridor she turned into was a dead end. Wrong way, let's go back. When they turned around, the female staff member was standing at the entrance to the corridor. Upon spotting Avery and Ethan, she immediately said something into her phone. I found them. C deck, west side. Avery quickly looked for another route. There was a crew-only door at the dead-end corridor. Without hesitation, she opened it and pulled Ethan inside. Aren't we not supposed to go in here? Ethan asked worriedly. It's okay in an emergency, Avery replied. The crew area hallway was narrow with dim lighting. They proceeded further and emerged into the back of the kitchen. Chefs were busy working, and they tried to pass through as inconspicuously as possible. Excuse me, passengers aren't allowed here, a young cook called out to them. Avery made a split-second decision to tell the truth. Please help us. My son and I are in danger. My husband poisoned us. Avery. Turning around, she saw Richard standing at the kitchen entrance. Beside him were the female staff member from earlier and a man in a security uniform. She's my wife. She's been mentally unstable, Richard told the kitchen staff. His voice sounded concerned, but his eyes were cold. Avery stood protectively in front of her son. Stay away. You tried to kill us. As the surrounding staff showed surprised expressions, Richard moved closer. Calm down. You're confused. You need to take medicine and rest. Liar. Avery shouted. You poisoned our dinner. And I heard you say on the phone, by morning, they'll both be at the bottom of the sea. The security officer looked at Richard. Sir, shall I escort your wife to your room? Richard nodded calmly. She's been showing symptoms of paranoia lately. I was planning to have her see a doctor. Don't believe him. Avery was desperate. This man is planning insurance fraud. My son and I each have $1 million life insurance policies. I have proof. She took out the cake wrapped in a napkin from her pocket. This is part of the dinner my husband served. If you test it, you'll find poison. The kitchen was filled with tension. Perhaps moved by Avery's desperation, an older chef stepped forward. Wait a moment. This is serious. Let's call the security chief. Richard's expression momentarily hardened. That's not necessary. This is a family matter. I'll take care of my wife. No, I will not go with my husband, Avery said, embracing her son. Please protect us. The chef said something to the security officer, who began communicating on his radio. Richard stared intently at the two. Just then, the female staff member whispered something to him. Richard bit his lip and looked at the exit. Please stay where you are. The ship's security chief appeared with several subordinates. A stern-looking middle-aged man, he was trying to quickly assess the situation. Please explain the situation, he said, turning to Avery. With a trembling voice, Avery began explaining. My husband prepared dinner for me and my son. After eating, we began to feel disoriented. As I was losing consciousness, I heard my husband say on the phone, by morning, they'll both be at the bottom of the sea. She offered the cake wrapped in a napkin. This is evidence. Please test it. The security chief took the cake and instructed one of his staff to secure it. This is a serious accusation. We need to hear from both parties. Richard stepped forward, feigning calmness. My wife has been experiencing hallucinations recently. She needs treatment. He's lying. Avery cried. He's conspiring with his mistress to kill us. And Carol, his mother, is also involved. Mistress? The security chief tilted his head. Avery pointed to the female staff member. Her. She's Richard's mistress. The woman's face changed color as she looked at Richard. Richard couldn't hide his anxious expression. This is ridiculous. Sophia is just an acquaintance. Sophia. Avery raised her voice. So you know her name. Yet she was never introduced to me. The security chief focused on Sophia. What is your relationship with this man? Sophia hesitated, looking at Richard. We are. She has nothing to do with this, Richard quickly answered. What matters is that my wife is mentally unstable. I am not unstable. Avery took out her phone. My husband's behavior had been suspicious for weeks. Look at what I found in his study. She showed the phone screen. There was a photo of life insurance policies. Avery and Ethan were named, each with $1 million death benefit. This is family insurance. Nothing suspicious about it, Richard said, but his voice was shaking. And these debt collection notices. Avery showed another photo. You have over $500,000 in debt. The blood drained from Richard's face. He looked towards Sophia, but she took a step back. Richard, you never told me about money problems. The security chief was beginning to understand the situation. Mr. Monroe, I'd like you to explain these accusations. Richard momentarily tried to escape but was surrounded by security staff. He dropped his shoulders in resignation. I had debts. Failed investments. So you tried to kill us. For the insurance money. Avery's voice trembled with anger and sadness. Richard didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Just then, the elevator doors opened, and Carol appeared. She froze momentarily upon seeing Richard surrounded by security. What's happening? Carol, you're an accomplice too, Avery said. You were helping your son kill us. That's absurd. Carol denied, but her eyes were wide with fear. The security chief instructed his subordinates, take them all to separate rooms and contact the authorities. We'll hand them over to the police upon arrival at port. Sophia suddenly began crying. I didn't know, he just said he was getting a divorce, not killing. Avery held Ethan tightly. Her fear had turned to anger. As Richard was being led away, he looked back once at Avery and Ethan. There was no regret in his eyes, only anger that his plan had failed. I trusted you, Avery said quietly. We were a family. Richard was led away without answering. Carol, too, was escorted to a separate room, resisting all the while. The security chief approached Avery and Ethan. Ma'am, let's have you both examined in the medical bay. And we'll prepare a safe room for you. Avery nodded. She looked at her son's face and smiled slightly. It's okay, Ethan. We're safe now. Ethan clung to his mother. Mom, can we go home? Yes, of course, Avery stroked her son's hair. We're going to start a new life. On their way to the medical bay, Avery gazed at the dark sea visible through the window. A few hours ago, that sea was supposed to be her and her son's grave. But now, it felt like a boundary between past and future. The cruise ship, Atlantic Star, changed its schedule and made an emergency return to the port of Miami, Florida. Police vehicles and news crews were waiting at the port. After being examined by doctors, Avery and Ethan were protected by police. Their image disembarking from the ship was broadcast nationwide on the early morning news. Richard, Sophia, and Carol were each placed in separate police vehicles and taken away. Richard maintained an expressionless face until the end, but Carol desperately tried to hide her face from reporters. Sophia was in tears, talking to a police officer. She intends to become a cooperating witness, prosecutor Jennifer Robinson explained to Avery. She was a dignified woman in her 40s who greeted Avery in the hospital waiting room. According to Sophia, she didn't know about the plan to kill you and Ethan. Watching Ethan's sleeping face, Avery replied, I don't know whether to believe she's telling the truth. We'll investigate, Jennifer affirmed. Her testimony will be important. But the evidence you collected is already powerful enough. Tests revealed that the chocolate cake contained a powerful sleeping drug, nearly a lethal dose. Further evidence was found in Richard's phone records. As trial preparations proceeded, Avery and Ethan temporarily stayed with her sister Melissa in Boston. I'll absolutely protect both of you, Melissa said. Having previously worked as a counselor for domestic violence victims, she was experienced in helping people with emotional trauma. When the trial began, the full extent of Richard's plan was revealed. He had accumulated over $500,000 in debt over the past 3 years. Gambling and failed investments were the cause, but he had kept it hidden from Avery. The defendant devised the most despicable plan to avoid financial ruin, the prosecution stated in opening arguments. He attempted to murder his wife and son to collect $2 million in life insurance. But even more shocking facts came to light. According to Carol's testimony, Richard's father Walter's heart attack may not have been natural. Richard had tampered with his father's medication to weaken him. He had his eye on his father's inheritance as well, the prosecutor told the jury. The murder plan on the cruise ship may not have been his first crime. Carol, too, was more than just an accomplice. She had helped her son's plan to protect the family fortune. According to her statement, she had always thought that Avery was not worthy of the family bloodline. "I wanted to keep my grandson," Carol said on the witness stand with a trembling voice. "Ethan carries our blood, but Avery." She choked on her words. During the trial, Avery took the stand multiple times. Her composed testimony and collected evidence supported the prosecution's case. Fortunately, Ethan didn't need to testify, but a drawing he made, depicting an angry-faced father and a crying mother, was submitted as evidence. "The trauma this child experienced is immeasurable," child psychologist Dr. Chen testified in court. He was betrayed by the most trustworthy figure, his father. After a 3-month trial, Richard was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. Carol received 15 years, while Sophia, as a cooperating witness, got a 5-year suspended sentence. Justice prevailed, prosecutor Jennifer told Avery after the trial. "Your courage and quick thinking prevented irreparable harm." For Avery and Ethan, the road to recovery was long and difficult. Ethan often woke up with nightmares and had trouble concentrating at school. Avery decided to seek professional counseling for both her son and herself. "Overcoming trauma takes time," therapist Dr. Lawrence told them. "But you're both incredibly strong. You'll get through this." 6 months later, Avery left Boston and moved to a small town in Connecticut. There, she opened a new interior design office, and Ethan started at a new school. "We needed a fresh start," Avery told her sister Melissa on the phone. "Both Ethan and I needed to emerge from the shadows of our past." Her new business grew steadily, thanks to her creativity and determination. Through connections from Richard's insurance industry days, she acquired several important clients. Ironically, Richard's former colleagues were happy to help her. Ethan, too, was showing signs of recovery. He made new friends and joined a soccer team. He still had nightmares occasionally, but less frequently. On a spring day, 1 year after the cruise ship incident, Avery hosted a small gardening party at her home. Ethan's friends and their parents, her new friends, and Melissa and her family gathered. Avery raised her glass to new beginnings. Ethan stood beside his mother, holding her hand. His eyes held a brightness that hadn't been there a year ago. "Mom, we're going to be okay, right?" he asked quietly. Avery looked at her son and smiled. "Yes, we're going to be fine. Now and always." She thought about the drawer containing newspaper clippings, a photo of Richard in prison, articles about Carol's deteriorating mental state, a short piece about Sophia's rehabilitation program. They were part of her past but no longer shaped her future. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of newly planted flowers. Avery took a deep breath, savoring this peaceful moment. Fear hadn't completely disappeared, but hope now prevailed. She and Ethan had weathered the darkest storm through love and courage. "It's a beautiful day," she said quietly, looking up at the sky. Ethan nodded with a smile. "Yes, it really is a beautiful day." In a spring garden full of promises of new life, mother and son stood hand in hand. Their story began with betrayal and danger but transformed into a tale of love and recovery.